Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on, my lordy? Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on, my lordy? Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on, my lordy? Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? Oh, brothers, can you hear me? Oh, tell me if you can.
And that's the voices of the Freedom Singers. They're bringing us up to 8:36 as we start a public affair here at Community Radio, KGNU Boulder, Denver. I'm Maeve Conran, and in the studio with me is Alternative Radio's David Barsamian. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Maeve, and we're here to celebrate the life and work of our dear friend, comrade, mentor, everybody's favorite teacher, as Naomi Klein described him, Howard Zinn, who passed away last Wednesday at the age of 87. There's so much to say about Howard Zinn. One phrase from Kipling comes to mind, from Kim. He was a friend to the whole world. And this morning, as I was listening to the news headlines, there were so many things that would have agitated and made Howard furious. For example, Exxon just posted $6 billion in profits for the fourth quarter. Not bad for an American corporation. The United States is selling over $6 billion in weapons to Taiwan. Obama has proposed a new Pentagon budget with new increases, well over $700 billion. And if you factor in all the other hidden costs, it's about $1 trillion. And this will include billions of dollars for Afghan and Iraqi, the training of Afghan and Iraqi security forces. How about some security for the American people? How about some security for the millions who are without work in this country? 1 in 7 is unemployed in the United States today. Millions of people have lost their homes. There are personal bankruptcies. There is enormous economic dislocation here. Yet the empire of bases, the empire of war continues, simply not caring about what is actually going on here in the U.S. 41 people were killed in Iraq in a bombing. The Supreme Court ruling of just a few days ago formalizes the absolute corporate control of our political system. These are all things that Howard Zinn would have spoken out against and spoken very loudly. We began with that music. Significantly, which side are you on? This is the 50th anniversary of the Greensboro sit-ins in Greensboro, North Carolina, which helped to launch one phase of the civil rights movement. It was launched earlier in Montgomery in 1955 with the bus boycott, but this really ignited a nationwide movement, and Howard Zinn was right there in the South. He was teaching at the all-black college, women's college in Atlanta, Spelman, and he was marching with SNCC. He was in those demonstrations. So which side are you on, brothers and sisters, those of you who can hear my voice this morning? Are you with the bosses? Are you with the imperialists? Are you with the capitalist predators? Are you with materialism? Are you with, supporting the forces of war? Or are you on the other side? Are you with the people? Are you with the oppressed? I know these are kinds of, maybe romantic notions of the poor, the oppressed, the downtrodden. But Howard Zinn was always there for those people, the most vulnerable, the least advantaged. And his voice will be, of course, greatly missed. But I want to give, our listeners a little flavor of what Howard Zinn was thinking about in the early days of the Obama presidency. And we're going to go to the last interview I ever did with him, which was called Against Discouragement. This is Howard Zinn on Obama.
Yeah, well, Obama basically follows the values that have been the values of all presidents of the United States from the beginning, Democrat or Republican. Richard Hofstadter, the historian, who was, one of my mentors, you might say, when I went to Columbia University, and who wrote the book, a wonderful book called The American Political Tradition. In this book, Rich Hofstadter examines the presidents of the United States, the leaders of the United States, from the founding fathers down to Franklin Roosevelt. And what he finds, and this has always intrigued me, what Hofstadter finds in examining the policies of these presidents, whether Democratic or Republican, liberal or conservative, there were fundamental principles that all of them followed. One of them, preserve capitalism. The other, expand national power. Obama seems to be stuck in exactly that position. His economic policies are predicated on capitalism and the market system. His foreign policies are still militaristic, expansionist, yes, imperialistic. He talks about America, leading the way, being, the beacon for the world. This is the old rhetoric. It's time we got off this high horse of America leading the world and deciding that America should become a more modest country, pull back our troops from other countries, not insist that we must set the standard. Our standards are not very good. So Obama, I think, has to make a really drastic change in his policies.
The words of Howard Zinn, spoken last February, just after the inauguration. It's part of our tribute show that this morning we're looking back at the legacy of the great Dr. Zinn, who died last Wednesday in the studio. Longtime friend and colleague of Dr. Zinn, David Barsamian. Thank you, David, for coming in and sharing these and sharing your memories, because I know you worked with Dr. Zinn for many years, and in fact you were going to be meeting with him this past week as well.
Yes, I was. He arrived in Santa Monica, and I was to fly to L.A. On Thursday. When I got the news on Wednesday afternoon that he had died while swimming, incidentally, which I thought was very poetic, because he and his wife Roz loved to swim. They had a summer house in Wellfleet on Cape Cod, and in the coldest of waters they would go swimming. And Howard had a heart attack while swimming in the pool, in this indoor pool in Santa Monica, and he was rescued. He was pulled out, and the person asked him, do you want us to call 911? And he said, no, I'm all right. And he is all right. He's all right for all of us who knew him.
Well, we talk about Howard Zinn being a historian, and, when we look at some of these historical events, we talked about the civil rights movement that he was so closely involved in, even looking back to Colorado history, the Ludlow massacre. But right now we're hearing about how, he was so relevant about what is happening right now. We're hearing his voice, his words about what's happening in the current administration. And David, earlier in the show, you talked about some of the news that's happening right now that would have outraged Dr. Zinn just hearing today's headlines. So it's such a relevant voice.
I remember in November and December of 2008, after Obama got elected, and the appointments that ensued, reappointing Gates as the war secretary, Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State, but most importantly, Geithner as his Secretary of the Treasury, and Lawrence Summers to be his national economic advisor. This indicated to Howard, at that moment, he was already saying, look what's going on. Look at the people staffing this administration. This is the Goldman Sachs Wall Street gang that was responsible for the economic collapse and then the subsequent bailout. So he was early, that century, that clarion call of, look out, this isn't, maybe this isn't, this wonderful, great liberal reincarnation of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So he was on to that very, very early. We're going to go to another clip of Howard Zinn, if you've got it queued up, on militarism. No, we don't have that.
We're going to go first to a musical break, and it's "We Shall Not Be Moved," which is a very
This is community
song.
radio,
this
folks.
Is appropriate song, and then
we
we'll
improvise. We've got several CD players here, and we've got to get everything queued up. So we're going to go to a bit of music. "We Shall Not Be Moved," the SNCC Freedom Singers. Supplemental spendings for wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's close to $1 trillion a year.
Yes, the military budget is enormously loaded. Why is there no discussion of it? The press is remarkably silent. The politicians are silent. Of course, there are huge economic interests involved in maintaining the military budget, huge corporate profits involved in the military budget. The military budget enables the United States to be an imperial expansionist power with military bases all over the country and to conduct wars. And it's become a kind of hush-hush subject. And what strikes me is that the public, I believe, if there was some political leadership or if there was some leadership in the media to begin questioning the military budget, I believe the public would recognize that the military budget is crowding out and starving the social programs that this country could have if it weren't spending $1 trillion a year on the military. And, it's one of those sort of hidden premises that nobody, like the emperor has no clothes, that people are trained not to question, but absolutely should be questioned. Yes, I came to a conclusion that war cannot be tolerated, no matter what we're told. And if we think that there are good wars, and that therefore, well, maybe this is a good war, I wanted to examine the so-called good wars, the holy wars, and take a good look at them, and think again about the phenomenon of war, and come to the conclusion, yes, war cannot be tolerated. No matter what we're told, no matter what tyrant exists, what border has been crossed, what aggression has taken place, it's not that we're going to be passive in the face of tyranny or aggression, no. But we'll find ways other than war to deal with whatever problems we have. Because war is inevitably the indiscriminate, massive killing of huge numbers of people, and children are a good part of those people. Every war is a war against children. So it's not just getting rid of Saddam Hussein. Think about it. Well, we got rid of Saddam Hussein. In the course of it, we killed huge numbers of people who had been victims of Saddam Hussein. When you fight a war against a tyrant, who do you kill? You kill the victims of the tyrant. Anyway, all this was simply to make us think again about war, and to think, we're at war now, right? In Iraq, in Afghanistan, and sort of in Pakistan, since we're sending rockets over there and killing innocent people in Pakistan. And so we should not accept that. We should look for a peace movement to join. Really, look for some peace organization to join. It will look small at first and pitiful and helpless, but that's how movements start. That's how the movement against the Vietnam War started. Started with handfuls of people who thought they were helpless, thought they were powerless. But remember this, the power of the people on top depends on the obedience of the people below. When people stop obeying, they have no power. When workers go on strike, huge corporations lose their power. When consumers boycott, huge business establishments have to give in. When soldiers refuse to fight, as so many soldiers did in Vietnam, so many deserters, so many fraggings, acts of violence by enlisted men against officers in Vietnam, B-52 pilots refusing to fly bombing missions anymore. War can't go on. When enough soldiers refuse, the government has to decide we can't continue. So yes, people have the power. If they begin to organize, if they protest, if they create a strong enough movement, they can change things. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Howard Zinn, in the last public talk he ever gave, talking about war, talking about the power of the people. The power of the people on top depends on the obedience of the people below. And one of the great things that Howard Zinn did, of course, was radicalize our perspective on history. Prior to A People's History of the United States, which incidentally had an initial publishing run of 4,000 copies, it was barely promoted by Harper, its publisher. It was barely reviewed. Today it's approaching 2 million copies, and each successive year it sells more copies than the previous year. What Howard did in that masterwork was to change our lenses. Prior to that, almost exclusively, history was seen through the eyes of great men, and they were almost exclusively men, presidents, secretaries of state, generals, secretaries of war, and the like. Howard Zinn was able to bring us history from the working class, from women, from immigrants, from Latinos, from African Americans, a completely different perspective on how history is seen and depicted. And today this has literally ignited a movement. There are now people's histories of the Civil War. There's a people's history of U.S. sports. More and more people's history. So that is an enormous contribution in radicalizing our lenses, in changing the way that we look at things and look at the world. There was the final piece we're going to hear is an extract from the very last interview I did with Howard called Against Discouragement. And it's an interesting title because I think, at times of grief like this and mourning, we feel discouraged. We feel discouraged that the liberal, progressive, quote-unquote, Obama is expanding the war in Afghanistan, expanding the Pentagon budget, increasing the size of the U.S. military, deploying just a couple of days ago new missile defenses in the Middle East, ostensibly to protect the Middle East from Iranian attack, although no such attack has ever been made, threat of such an attack has ever been made by the Iranians. These are the kinds of things that would have outraged Howard Zinn, and he would have been quick to point out all of the contradictions and all of the hypocrisies of the great men in power. We're not going to change the United States. We're not going to change the world until people mobilize, organize, and fight from below. You'll remember it was Obama who told us, the people, that if you want me to do something, he said, make me do it. Where is that pressure now to make him do things that we want? I think the struggle for justice is the great work of humankind on earth, and I think Howard Zinn was one of our greatest fighters, one of our most eloquent voices for that struggle for justice. We're now going to hear the very last interview I did with Howard, including his Spelman College address to students there called Against Discouragement. In 1963, you were fired from Spelman College.
I wish you would put it in a more gentle way. Just today, I got an email from somebody who said, I understand 1963 you were asked to leave by Spelman College. That's a more polite way of saying it. But, David, I have to admit, I was fired.
You had supported your students with whom you had been active in the movement against racial segregation. In May of 2005, you were invited back by Spelman to receive an honorary degree and to give the commencement address. This is in the afterword of original Zinn. It's entitled Against Discouragement. If I may ask you to read this, I'd be most appreciative.
Of course, I love to read my own words. And yeah, it was quite a remarkable day, actually. And I got such a warm welcome from the students and the parents and the faculty and the new president of Spelman College. So here's what I said to the assembled students and parents, but mostly, yes, addressing the students. I'm deeply honored to be invited back to Spelman after 42 years. But this is your day, the students graduating today. It's a happy day for you and your families. I know you have your own hopes for the future, so it may be a little presumptuous for me to tell you what hopes I have for you. But they're exactly the same ones that I have for my own grandchildren. My first hope is that you will not be too discouraged by the way the world looks at this moment. It is easy to be discouraged because our nation is at war, still another war. War after war, and our government seems determined to expand its empire, even if it costs the lives of tens of thousands of human beings. There's poverty in this country, and homelessness, and people without health care, and crowded classrooms. But our government, which has trillions of dollars to spend, is spending its wealth on war. There are 1 billion people in Asia, Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, who need clean water and medicine to deal with malaria and tuberculosis and AIDS. But our government, which has thousands of nuclear weapons, is experimenting with even more deadly nuclear weapons. Yes, it's easy to be discouraged by all that. But let me tell you why, in spite of what I have just described, you must not be discouraged. I want to remind you that 50 years ago, racial segregation here in the South was entrenched as tightly as was apartheid in South Africa. The national government, even with liberal presidents like Kennedy and Johnson in office, was looking the other way while black people were beaten and killed and denied the opportunity to vote. So black people in the South decided they had to do something by themselves. They boycotted and sat in and picketed and demonstrated and were beaten and jailed, and some were killed. But their cries for freedom were soon heard all over the nation and around the world, and the President and Congress finally did what they had previously failed to do, enforce the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. Many people had said the South will never change, but it did change. It changed because ordinary people organized and took risks and challenged the system and would not give up. That's when democracy came alive. I want to remind you also that when the war in Vietnam was going on and young Americans were dying and coming home paralyzed, and our government was bombing the villages of Vietnam, bombing schools and hospitals and killing millions of people in huge numbers, it looked hopeless to try to stop the war. But just as in the Southern movement, people began to protest, and soon it caught on. It was a national movement. Soldiers were coming back and denouncing the war. Young people were refusing to join the military, and the war had to end. The lesson of that history is that you must not despair, that if you are right and you persist, things will change. The government may try to deceive the people, and the newspapers and television may do the same, but the truth has a way of coming out. The truth has a power greater than 100 lies. I know you have practical things to do to get jobs and get married and have children. You may become prosperous and be considered success in the way our society defines success, by wealth and standing and prestige, but that is not enough for a good life. Remember Tolstoy's story, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. A man on his deathbed reflects on his life, how he has done everything right, obeyed the rules, become a judge, married, had children, and is looked upon as a success. Yet in his last hours he wonders why he feels a failure. After becoming a famous novelist, Tolstoy himself had decided that this was not enough, that he must speak out against the treatment of the Russian peasants, that he must write against war and militarism. My hope is that whatever you do to make a good life for yourself, whether you become a teacher or social worker or a business person or lawyer or poet or scientist, you will devote part of your life to making this a better world for your children, for all children. My hope is that your generation will demand an end to war, that your generation will do something that has not yet been done in history, and wipe out the national boundaries that separate us from other human beings on this earth.
The voice of Howard Zinn from the very last interview I ever did with him, called Against Discouragement. He was reading from his talk that he gave at Spelman College in 2005. And as a tribute to Howard Zinn, and he was a great friend of community radio, not just KGNU, but around the country and around the world, I'd like to make this interview available to anyone who writes to me at info@alternativeradio.org, info@alternativeradio.org, and we'll send you a CD of the very last interview I did with Howard Zinn. It's a tremendous work, and I also want to say that, Maeve, because we were talking as we were listening, the impact of Howard Zinn around the world. I've been receiving not just condolences and messages from all over the United States and Canada, but from Iran, from Pakistan, from India. His reach was absolutely enormous. He was a rare figure, quite remarkable in so many ways. And one of the greatest things, I must say, privileges I've had, not only working with Howard Zinn, that in the last couple of years with the Kronos Quartet, we did a couple of public events where we integrated music and political discussion right on the stage. And we did this at Carnegie Hall in New York and at the Mozart Festival in Vienna, in absolutely incredible settings for this. And this has to rank with, some of the most thrilling moments of my life, to be, on stage with Howard, with the Kronos Quartet, and innovating this form. And that was also part of what he was about. He was always interested in the arts, music, poetry, cinema. He completed, just before he died, a new documentary film called The People Speak, which will be available as a DVD in this month. In coming weeks, you can go to the People Speak. I'm sure it's on websites, thepeoplespeak.org, and get that. So it's been a great ride for Howard. We'll miss you.
Well, David, we really appreciate you coming in this morning. I know it's incredibly difficult. You're a close friend of Dr. Zinn. Everyone is touched by his passing, and particularly you, who worked with him for many years. Thank you so much for coming in, sharing your thoughts, David Barsamian, with Alternative Radio. Appropriately enough, we're going to go out with the Kronos Quartet. I had not realised until this morning Dr. Zinn had been instrumental in that pairing of music and politics. This is KGNU Boulder, Denver. It's just coming up on 9:05. As we go into Counterspin, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting's weekly show, we're going to go out with the music of the Kronos Quartet. And just to assure our listeners, we will have further tributes to Dr. Zinn. There's so much to talk about, so much more to discuss, and they will be coming in the coming weeks. David Barsamian, thank you so much for being with us this morning. It's 9:05. This is KGNU Boulder, Denver.